We are live, week 13, and you're part of the fantasy football world. Week 13 sends ripples through as week 13. Some leagues, the playoffs have started. Congratulations if you made the Fish Bowl playoffs. Some leagues, this is a week that will determine who goes to the playoffs and who stays home. This can be a league that determines buys. It can be a league that determines a week that determines matchups. And there's a lot to talk about because it's the NFL, and there's always a lot to talk about. Gene, let's just get this out of the way first. Dr. Jene Bramel, as always, thanks for joining us. Let's talk about the games Monday and Tuesday, 2020 year like no other. Just to get this out of the way, because people are making decisions this morning that involve these players. Ben Roethlisberger, thumbs up or not? Got to wait and see.
He's fine.
Terry McLaurin,
fine.
Lamar Jackson.
He should be back. We haven't heard anything that suggests that he had a symptomatic case, even mildly symptomatic. And then there were notes from both the local beat writers and Adam Schefter this morning already that says he's expected to be activated today, should get at least a day of practice. And I don't expect there to be any issue there. He should be able to play too.
Rappaport also said that this morning he's going to start.
Yeah, and Schefter. So when the Schefter Rappaport stamp approvals come in, that's good. But real quick, Gene, Mark Andrews, Willie Snead, not so good.
No, they don't have time to recover enough. Their 10 days will not be up until the middle of the week. Same with James Conner.
Okay, Woodrow. Welcome back, Jason.
Thank you.
Love the festivity. I got my happy almost Mardi Gras shirt on.
See
although
that? Yeah.
Mardi Gras is going to be different this year down here. Does this give you the permission to finally sit Lamar Jackson, Jason, or is this exactly the wrong time to finally give up on your second round pick or third round pick because he's facing Dallas on Tuesday?
Yeah, I'd have a hard time. Well, listen, as you noted, I mean, for most leagues, this is either the final week before the playoffs or the second to last week. But I think for the majority of leagues, it's probably the final week. So if you still have something to play for, and I hope most of you watching or listening do, then it really comes down to expected outcome. If you need a win and you're in, and you feel like you're a legitimate underdog to a better opponent, I have trouble believing you're going to have a better option than Lamar Jackson, because we still know that if he's right, particularly against what should be an excellent matchup against Dallas, he can win a week for you. Now, we haven't seen that much this year, so I understand why you're asking the question, Sig. But like I have a league that it's like an expert league, and I happen to have Aaron Rodgers and Lamar Jackson. So it's been easy for me this year, right? I've kept Lamar Jackson on my bench after the first month without any hesitation, and I'll do that again this week. But I have another 2 leagues with Lamar Jackson, and it's been a painful thing. One, I'm already eliminated from the playoffs. The other, it's pretty much win and I'm in, so I'm playing him. I mean, because why not, right? Like, I need a big score. I need to give myself the best position, and it's him or Ryan Tannehill or Jared Goff. So sure, in that case, I'm going to put Lamar Jackson in, because this should be a week that he balls out. So I just think it comes down to your risk parameters this week. What do you need? If you feel like the rest of your roster is tight and right and healthy, and you just need your quarterback not to pull a Wentz and just crap the bed, then maybe you go with the other guy that you have on your roster, right? Because if you just don't need the big score. But I just think if he's active against that team, he's got a close to a 20-point floor. So I'm all for him this week. Why not?
I think you nailed it when you said 20-point floor. I mean, it's Dallas. I think that if you're on the fence, I'm not going to get cute. I'm not going to play Taysom Hill over Lamar Jackson. Even some volume risk guys like Ryan Tannehill. Probably, Lamar Jackson is, if you're stopping and pausing and thinking about it, which means you're not weighing Lamar Jackson against Aaron Rodgers,
right,
or Justin Herbert. Well, that's a good one. Let me kick that one over to you, Woodrow. Justin Herbert against Bill Belichick, or Lamar Jackson against Mike Nolan.
Well, maybe this is where being an old head like me hurts me, because I still believe in the mantra of go with who got you there. And Herbert's been great, so I don't have that decision to make this week in any league. But if I did, I'd lean to Herbert.
One last one coming up tomorrow, Gene. Any pause on Deebo Samuel, or you think this is just the 49ers managing him coming back from the hamstring?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. He had a big workload in his first week back. Kyle Shanahan said they were just managing him and basically giving a day off, and then 2 full practices and coming off the injury report altogether. Should not be any issue with him.
All right. So again, looking tomorrow night, Woodrow, just a general level of confidence, heat check.
Mhm.
Deebo Samuel is now someone that you're considering as a wide receiver too, or is that too hasty based on just that one game last week, a tremendous game it was?
No, I mean, I think a wide receiver 2 is fair. I have him just at the tail end of the wide receiver 2. I think I don't have my rankings up, but it's like I think he's 24th or 25th. So yeah, I think that's a fine way to characterize it. Not crazy about the matchup, not crazy about Nick Mullins, but this is do or die time, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised if he helps you win and get in this week. So yeah, I'm fine with it.
And as you said, Nick Mullins, not crazy about it. However, it seems like a lot of the production in this 49ers offense is from play designs, play calls, from
Sure.
Kyle Shanahan.
Yep.
How or does that even affect? So let me step back. There's the classic morass of running back twos this week. In other words, there's not a lot of guys that give you confidence. However you rank your running backs, once you get to about running back 12 to 15 range, you're not really sure. How does Raheem Mostert fit in with guys like Devontae Booker, Myles Gaskin, David Montgomery this week? Woodrow, is he one of your preferred guys to take a chance on, or are you backing off a little bit of Mostert compared to some of the other running backs that are coming on?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good question, and I think for me, it's a pretty wide range of the guys you just threw out. I mean, Montgomery would be atop that list for me for sure. Very good game last week coming back. No real competition for touches. Division opponent that should be able to, at least as long as the two-headed monster at quarterback doesn't screw things up with a lot of turnovers, there should be a positive game script for him. So I think Montgomery is a top 10 guy for me this week, believe it or not. So he's atop the list. Myles Gaskin, as you noted, is active. Phenomenal matchup. They brought him off the COVID list. So I think he's kind of gone under the radar. If you aren't a Myles Gaskin, if you don't have him on your roster, you probably don't realize how effective he's been when he's been healthy. So I like him a little more than Mostert, but I think Mostert's a top 15 guy. I realize Devontae Booker is an exciting option because they're playing the Jets and because Jacobs is out. But man, I don't know. This is either your first playoff week or it's a week where you're trying to hold on to a playoff spot or make the playoffs. I have trouble feeling good about Devontae Booker if you have all options like a Mostert or a Kenyon Drake or a J.K. Dobbins or Jonathan Taylor. Like I'd play all of them over Booker for sure.
Yeah, I think that the words fantasy playoffs, trust, and Devontae Booker all in the same sentence. Just not ready for that yet.
Right.
Speaking of David Montgomery, Gene. Oh, one last one, Woodrow, before we switch the page back to today.
Mm-hmm.
J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah.
Tuesday night. It feels like a leap of faith. Is it a leap of faith?
Oh, it's very much a leap of faith, but it's one that I'm willing to tell people to go ahead and do, and I'm doing. I mean, I am one of those people. Every league has him that drafted Dobbins, held on to him pretty much the whole year, has gotten a little bit of value from him of late before the COVID situation, but it certainly was a rocky start. And I'm in a position, like many, I'm sure, where I don't feel like I have a playoff spot locked up in a bunch of leagues. And I'm going for maximizing my point total. I'm going boomer bust this week. And with that, Dobbins is a very attractive option for me, given the matchup and the fact that he's healthy. And I know Ingram's back healthy too, but we were seeing the writing on the wall before COVID that Ingram was being relegated. And I just think Dobbins is – I wouldn't be at all surprised if when we're doing our 2021, May, June, hey, everybody, let's welcome back to fantasy. Here's what we think. We're talking about how J.K. Dobbins helped the Ravens make a deep run, at the end of the season into a playoff spot and a playoff run, and how he helped fantasy leagues win if they were patient with him all year. So I'm pretty much all in on the Dobbins narrative. But but specifically to your point, it is absolutely a leap of faith. I mean, he hasn't been consistent enough or active enough for us to just feel like it's a lock and load. But I'm pretty excited and I'm counting on Dobbins coming through this week.
It's Dallas. How many times this year has playing guys against Dallas gone wrong. That's what I'm thinking. I was going to switch gears to Chicago, Detroit. We talked about this on Thursday, Gene, but we have more information. Dub Mentality wanted to ask, do you have any idea what's going on with DeAndre Swift?
Yeah, it sounds like he's mostly got an illness that showed up on Thursday. It was a really confusing week because of Adrian Peterson's comments.
Mm-hmm.
To be left on the injury report with a concussion on Wednesday and then all of a sudden be sent to the independent neurologist and fine on Thursday and then sent home with an illness, everything looks a little bit unusual. And I think this came down to just wasn't quite right. Took over a week to get better from the concussion, which is not unusual, and then able to be cleared this week, which looked fine. And then the illness kind of robbed him of any reconditioning and the ability for the Lions to get a look and see what they felt like they had in him. And, it's not necessarily an entirely lost season for the Lions. You'd like to get Swift as many carries as possible, but there's not a lot of sense in putting him out there if he's not in condition and ready to go. And if they were only going to give him a limited role anyhow, which is what Darren Bevel suggested, then the illness was probably enough to say, you know what, let's just bring him back through a full week of practice next week and get him back to the role that we were hoping we were going to see from him over the past couple of weeks, what we saw from back in week 11, I think it was. So I'm not too concerned about Swift. I guess there's still some room for interpretation in that illness, but I think it was much more about caution and the fact that he didn't practice this week than something that's lingering and that we're going to hear more about concussion-related symptoms next week and be concerned about him going forward. I think we're going to see him 15 plus touch role next week.
And Gene, what about the caution that had the Bears sit Allen Robinson with that knee issue during practice?
They've been doing that all year. It was a little bit unusual that they chose to do it this late in the week rather than earlier, but I don't think there's any concern there. It's been off and on all year. In fact, I think he's missed one practice and it's almost always listed as a knee for the past month and a half. So no real issue there.
Okay, Woodrow, this one's going to test us. And this is the kind of test that we're going to have for the rest of the fantasy playoffs on the Bears, because the Bears just have this wonderful schedule in terms of opponents, but they're the Bears. And every time I see Mitch Trubisky, I saw that T-shirt, I want to say, Mitch, please. It's Mitch, please. Mitch Trubisky against the Lions is like prime Aaron Rodgers. It's the matchup that he feasts on. Now, this is a Lions team also that could get the, as Cecil did the Freudian slip, called it the dead cat bounce,
Yes.
as the Lions are the cats. There's a relief, a weight lifted, a Matt Patricia-sized weight lifted from the Lions' shoulders. So just in general, because you sounded optimistic about David Montgomery, are we optimistic about the Bears knowing that the Lions can prepare for this game without having to worry about Matt Patricia looking over their shoulder?
Not particularly so. I'm certainly not that optimistic about Trubisky. It looks like Foles is going to be active.
Backup, active, but backup.
Right. But we know full well that it is certainly not out of the probability tree that Trubisky struggles and they put Foles back in. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see that happen. As you said, Trubisky's had some success against the Lions, so if you're ever going to feel great about him, this would probably be the week. But no, I don't think you can feel good. This is one of those games where I think it's hard to have a lot of confidence in how it goes because they're both bad teams and both have lots of upheaval. I mean, Matt Nagy was on full tilt after this past week, right? I mean, he had one of those playoffs, one of those kind of like head coach, and he almost seemed manic about it. And you're thinking, because it's funny because despite the way the Bears have played, I didn't perceive Nagy to be in any kind of danger or hot seat. I'm still not sure he is. But that press conference told me he thinks he is. I mean, he was apoplectic about the entire situation. So I'm not feeling great about where that team is at from a headspace perspective because Nagy didn't seem to be very confident in himself or his assistant coaches or his players. And certainly we don't. The Lions were so ill prepared and ill coached that yes, I understand this idea that it's addition by subtraction, but we don't really know. I mean, it's Darrell Bevel. I mean, are we really sure that they're just going to come out guns blazing? It's Darrell Bevel, right? So I don't know. I think the whole game is a mess. I'm avoiding it largely. Certainly, if you have Hawkinson, I imagine you're playing him because he's in what a strange year this has been. He's a top 3 fantasy tight end. He sure doesn't feel like it, but he is. And Allen Robinson, I think because he's active, you likely are playing him. Like I said, David Montgomery, you're absolutely playing him. But beyond that, man, I think it's best to avoid all this if you can.
And with Bevel, since you brought him up, it's a good note there that as the interim coach, he's talking about maybe a little tempo. So let's watch the Lions. Poor Matthew Stafford. Poor Lions fans. Okay, speaking of interim coaches, Dr. Gene, Atlanta and Raheem Morris. And it was really interesting to note, and it kind of happened through the hive mind of the football mind, because I know I led with this last week, that Raheem Morris deserves a chance to be a head coach somewhere.
Definitely.
If not maybe in Atlanta. They said, well, if he goes 11-0, if he wins all the rest of the games, we'll consider it. He hasn't done that. But he certainly has this team all pulling together, all on the same page. And Atlanta has something to play for. I think that, this is definitely not a team that is sleepwalking through the rest of the season. And they will have Julio Jones and Todd Gurley back today, but how effective will they be playing through these injuries?
I feel better about Julio than I do Gurley. I don't think there's any reason to think that Gurley is dealing with anything other than another flare of his arthritic knee. And whenever that's happened in the past 2 or 3 years, just hasn't been the same player afterwards. It needs to be managed and probably needs more time off than they're going to be able to give him. Sounds like Thursday's DNP, was more of a rest day than anything else, and he's going to play. And not that they have a stable of effective and talented backs behind him, but I just don't think we're going to see 18, 20, 22, 25 touches from Gurley. Not that he'd been getting that anyway, but I don't see very much chance of that moving forward. Julio, at some point you feel like they'd have to give him a more than 1 week. This is the third time this year they'd give him off at least 1 week and haven't done that. And Julio somehow, despite all these aggravations, has not sustained a significant enough aggravation to cost him multiple weeks. And on Friday, after the Thursday DNP that had everybody concerned, he said he was able to run every route like he normally would, felt better than he has in some time. The last time he missed a game back in week 5, he came back in week 6 and played 60 snaps and had double-digit targets and had 8 catches for 2 touchdowns and didn't look like he was limited at all. And we've seen that often over the years. And when Julio comes out and says, I'm feeling pretty good, he's been pretty good this year about telling us where he was. There have been times where he played and said, well, I just didn't really feel like I could run. That's really not the case with him. So I feel like a ceiling expectation is certainly in play for him this week. Obviously, there's another risk of aggravation where we might just see him there for a couple of series, feel that hamstring tighten up, and him not be able to go. But I feel pretty good about playing Julio Jones. Todd Gurley, probably not so much.
Gurley, Jones, these are easy calls for the most part for matchups, Woodrow. There is a tough one, maybe a lot of tough ones on the New Orleans side. The biggest one, though, because now we've had 2 data points of the Saints offense with Taysom Hill. Real quick, Gene, before I let you off the hook for a second here. Alvin Kamara, are we still in the same holding pattern with his foot? I mean, if we're trying to factor in what percentage of the Murray-Kamara trend is Kamara's foot, is it 0? Is it 10? Is it 50? Is it maybe 100?
I don't know how to rate Taysom Hill's role in this. I think that's probably the more important concern. We've seen Alvin Kamara play through this foot injury with Drew Brees and do wonderfully and not seem limited at all. I don't know that he is as explosive laterally as he had been before, but I don't see too much limitation. So I think having you guys debate whether or not this is a Taysom Hill situation or Alvin Kamara situation based on what the role and how the offense is moving is more important. But I don't think this is primarily an injury situation.
So, Woodrow, is it brilliant to go ahead and play Murray over Kamara, or otherwise just trust these last 2 weeks of data and your running back decision with Kamara, or is it exactly the wrong way you should be thinking about it?
I think it's the wrong way. I think we saw last year that when Kamara's out, Murray is a top 10, maybe even top 5 must start, lock it in. And I realize that Murray's had strong performances, but I think the way you really should be thinking about it is asking yourself, and again, a win and you're in type of week, is Murray worthy of your flex spot or your RB3 spot? But I just do not understand the narrative that if Kamara is not on the injury report and active, why you would bench him and play Latavius Murray. That struggle with that mightily. I really do. So no, I and it's certainly, it's all about sort of the mental mechanics of how you look back on your season. Let's say you need a win to get into the playoffs, or this is your first week of the playoffs. Can you imagine the lamentations you're going to have if you bench Alvin Kamara this week and play Latavius Murray and it doesn't work out? Now, of course, you can play the optimist and say, yeah, but if I do it and it works out, I'm going to feel like a king. That's true. But then you're that's like betting the long shot in a horse race and it paying off 1 out of 100 times and you convincing yourself that you're a genius. That was luck, right? That wasn't good process. Good process is playing a healthy Alvin Kamara. And I say healthy, meaning we have no reason to believe that he's injured enough that he was on the verge of not playing or having a limited role, because he hasn't designation for that. So got to play Kamara, but I also think it's totally reasonable to view Latavius Murray as a viable flex play this week.
Yeah, he definitely. And so to be positive on Kamara is not to be negative on Murray.
Precisely. Yeah.
It does seem like the way that Taysom Hill forces defenses to play 11 on 11 gives Murray and his quick hitting downhill runs more effectiveness.
I mean, if I may, the bigger question, and one I'll pose to you two, is what do you do with Michael Thomas, right? Because we've had 2 Taysom Hill weeks. The one I think went the way we would have expected and feared, that he's just not much of a thrower, and Michael Thomas was a non-factor. Then we had a week where Taysom Hill didn't throw a lot, but every time he did, he threw to Michael Thomas, and it was arguably Michael Thomas's best game since all of the whole injury and suspension nonsense started at the beginning of the year. I think a lot of us drafted Michael Thomas. I mean, he was certainly my most common first-round pick. And in some leagues that did me in, and in the leagues where it hasn't done me in, I'm really struggling with whether or not to confidently play him. I'm kind of going back to the idea like, well, it's Michael Thomas and it's when you're in, so I'm going to play him. But I wonder, I mean, how confident are you that Michael Thomas is back? And I will also say, because it was kind of breaking news here, it looks like Drew Brees is going to be likely active and back playing against the Eagles next week. Yay for me, Eagles fans. But so this is probably just a week 13 calculus. Like, It looks like Michael Thomas should be helping you in your fantasy playoffs if you make it in 14, 15, and 16, which is phenomenal if you held on to him and you struggled through. But this week, it's still a big decision, I think.
It is. And I'll say this, Michael Thomas against Atlanta, because the Denver game, like, how can you extrapolate anything meaningful out of the Denver game?
Sure.
It was a true outlier game, as outlier games go. We did see Thomas get more than half of the targets against Atlanta. We did see him getting open regularly. He actually even had a drop that would have put another 20 yards on him. And the Falcons secondary, notwithstanding what they did against the Raiders last week, something that haunts you a little bit if you're deciding about Devontae Booker today, we're going to just like we like playing players against Dallas, we're going to like playing passing game pieces against the Falcons. That being said, I think this is really fascinating because, Woodrow, you participated in this. A lot of people participated in this idea of, is Taysom Hill going to be a credible NFL quarterback? And he was for at least a game against Atlanta. But if your theory is, we'll give a team another chance, or when teams know what he does, then you're going to really see him unmasked. Well, Atlanta gets him now. So it's 2 weeks preparation, or whatever, 2 weeks of a time to think about what Hill did enough. And certainly Atlanta's coming in, playing in really well. So fantasy or not fantasy, this has just been an interesting data point, interesting empirical observation of whether Taysom Hill gets unmasked this week. All right, Gene, let's turn the page. Let's talk about before we turn the page, since Jason brought it up, Drew Brees back next week. Does that sound right to you?
No, is that what's being said? Did I miss something this morning?
Yeah, he can return. I saw it as early
to return. I don't know if that means he's coming back. He is eligible to return. Right. I don't know that means that he's coming back. I would think. I mean, what was it? 11 rib fractures, a bunch on one side. With I just think that's 2 rib fractures are. I mean, the math doesn't make sense here, right? But 2 rib fractures are exponentially more difficult to return from 1 because there's just too much moving parts there. So to have 7 on one side, even if some of them are so minor that they needed a CAT scan to be picked up on, is a significant injury. And Drew Brees plays through injuries. He already played through some of these rib fractures before. So I think there's room to expect that if the Saints feel like he's able to go and Brees has got any sense of accuracy and they can protect him, and they've had some issues with the offensive line recently, that maybe he'll be back a little bit sooner. I still think we're probably looking at 15 or even 16, depending on how his recovery goes. Just because he's eligible to return does not mean that's going to be the case. So hopefully that's what the tone of the reports were this morning, was just that he's eligible to come off and practice come Tuesday. Maybe they'll allow him to do that, to do some individual drills and things like that to get him prepared to play. But for now, I don't see much chance he comes back in week 14 unless there's been a ton of interval improvement.
And I think that now what I saw, Jason, you might have seen something different than me, was he can return. He may return as early as next week, which.
Yeah, Schefter said, I mean, you're right. Schefter said, because I was rereading it, he said that that Brees has progressed quickly, wants to come back, and is eligible to come back. But particularly because it's unfortunately facing off my lowly Eagles in week 14, it could be very likely that he's set for week 14 with an eye towards playing the Chiefs in week 15. So
yeah, I would think, and especially if that's a game that's like the bye, the number 1 seed. We still haven't had a week 18 yet, so we're looking at 7 teams on each side of the playoffs, not 8. So we'll see. I would think that the Saints, if they're rational, are focused on having him for the playoffs. That's of all importance, even if it means going on the road later on in the playoffs. Okay, really fascinating game here, Gene. Indy and Houston. And we talked about Adrian Peterson, how he threw things off. I can't even remember who it is now that said that Phillip Rivers is dealing with a bad toe, like really bad, like he's a lot worse than he's letting on. Should we heed that when we're looking at the Colts offense? Because it is the Texans defense they get today.
Yeah, and there was a report this morning that this is a plantar plate situation. So this is the ligaments that hold the toe to the midfoot together are essentially ruptured. It's at the far end of the plantar fascia. It basically keeps the toe and the foot together. It's not a Liz Frank situation necessarily, but this is a big injury. This is pretty much any other position would be season-ending surgery. Wow. And they're trying to get through probably with an orthotic in the shoe and things like that. We've seen him not be able to push off very well throughout the course of the last couple of weeks. Rivers is going to play through this injury. They're going to do what they can to manage. It's not like he moves around great in the pocket anyway, but they're really going to have to make sure that offensive line is playing well in order to give him enough time to maneuver around and get himself in a position to be able to throw the ball. So yeah, this is a big situation. Doesn't look like, if the Colts fall out of contention, maybe we're going to see Brissett. And I think, as we saw the last couple of weeks, if they need a little bit of a push, if they need somebody to push off a foot and gain a couple of yards, it's going to be Brissett. If they need somebody to throw the ball downfield and it's a known situation, they're probably going to bring in Brissett. So I think we're going to see Rivers this week and beyond, but could be a week-to-week situation based on how he's doing.
Yeah, Woodrow, I can't remember who said it when this news came out about his toe issue being a lot worse than he's letting on. Like, oh, well, there goes his mobility. That's a way to downplay it,
Right.
Oh, okay, but you do have decisions about Jonathan Taylor, about Nyheim Hines. T.Y. Hilton, it's Texans week. He finally scored last week, going into Texans week. Even Michael Pittman, who did let us down a little bit last week, but certainly gave us some glimmers in the weeks before that. Well, what's your relative level of confidence? Any Colts stand out as players you're probably talking yourself into or talking yourself out of against the Texans?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the big one, or the one I guess that could be season changing is the Jonathan Taylor situation, right? Before last week, it looked like he was finally maybe asserting himself, right? He had arguably his best week. He certainly had his highest snap percentage count. But then, then he was out. So, I'm because of the matchup, and even really also if you want to factor in that Phillip Rivers, they're going to need to protect him as much as they can. I think Jonathan Taylor could be a week winner for people this week. If you're in a position to consider him as your RB2 or certainly as a flex. I mean, he's probably the best flex you could ask for this week, I think. So I'm okay with him, and I think I would recommend rolling the dice. It's definitely a roll of the dice, but hey, go big or go home. I'm fine with playing Michael Pittman. Yeah, last week was a disappointment, but he still seems to have evolved into the role of their at least most consistent receiver. So I think he's perfectly viable as your wide receiver 3. Anything beyond that, then I think you're kind of grasping at straws. But those are the only 2 I feel great about. I know, Sig, I always look at your rankings and stuff before we record just to see where your head's at, see if where we disagree, where we agree. I see you have Phillip Rivers 12th this week, and I assume that's because of the matchup. So I grok with that, but I wouldn't feel great about that. But then I look like you have Trubisky and Goff and Cousins right beyond that. So it's like, I can't argue with, I wouldn't feel great about those guys either. So I think we're kind of at a state right now where there's maybe 8 or 9 quarterbacks you feel great about. So I don't have a problem with Rivers at 12. It's logical, but you certainly are, you're kind of holding your breath if you feel like if you have Rivers in your lineup, you're holding your breath.
There's like 4 you feel good about, and then there's 4 or 5 you want to feel good about, right? Like the Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, Lamar Jackson's, like you want to feel good about them, but there may be reasons that you don't. Yeah, and then you can be like, well, I guess I'm starting Jared Goff. I guess I'm starting Mitchell Trubisky. I guess I'm starting Phillip Rivers. Although with the update on Rivers, I may revise a few things down a little bit. Always, if you're relying on my projections, I'm glad you brought that up. Just know that, especially after inactives, when inactives are released, that's when I make my final adjustments. Sure. So there's a lot there. Real quick, by the way, and Dr. Gene had already given us this. It's confirmed reporting that James Conner's eligible to, but active for the game on Tuesday. Jason, where does Benny Snell fit into that running back 2 maze?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have assumed, and I guess mistakenly so, that Connor just was out of the picture this week. And if he's confirmed to still be out or inactive or something, which I guess it's not likely, but I was under the assumption that he was, in which case I was looking at Benny Snell as a running back too. I'm still not convinced Benny Snell's like that particularly talented, but it's against Washington. I think Pittsburgh, I know they're getting to the point where they don't have much to play for, but they still are only, they still have enough to play for. And I think probably there's a lot of pride going on that it would be pretty neat for them to go undefeated in a COVID era season, right? So, yeah, I'm fine with Snell. I have him just below Mostert, but ahead of the Devontae Booker tier. I'd play Kenyon Drake or Dobbins or Antonio Gibson or Gaskin over him if you're looking at those kind of decisions.
Yeah.
So he's like 16 to 18 for me in PPR, if that's kind of where I'm at with him. So he's probably in your lineup is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, I with Snell, I think you're looking at a game where he may only average 3 yards a carry, but he may score once or twice, depending on how well Ben Roethlisberger can pass the ball. Welcome in, Mitch Carl, DFS and Donuts. Give us some DFS perspectives, and I'll drop you right in like this.
Sounds good.
Kiki QD is in all of my lineups, Mitch. And if I could legally play DFS, he would be. We were just talking into Houston's. Let's stay with this game. He would be in all of my DFS lineups. But everybody knows that I am not an objective observer here. You are, Mitch. Are you mixing in your Eye of Newt, Kiki QD when you're cooking up your lineups this week?
All right, so that's an interesting spot because, Cootie's going to get a ton of snaps today. He'll get a ton of opportunity. And if you think that Cooks is limited or maybe their bracket coverage, they take away the 1-2, true threat in the passing game today, then Cootie might get peppered down in the, the low A-dot area. But my issue with him is what type of upside do you have? For DraftKings with a PPR site, I mean, you inherently are saying, I need probably 5-6 catches for 50, 60 yards, which is within the realm of possibility, but that is still basically just kind of like a cash game value. So a player like Kiki Cootie, I think you can use in cash games. If you're going to use him in a tournament, you might as well stack him with Deshaun Watson. And you're inherently saying, if I think Cootie's going to go out there and catch a touchdown today, 80 yards and a score, 7-8 catches for 90 yards, Deshaun Watson probably had a decent game if he was able to, manufacture production for Kiki. And I think the two of them are kind of tied together as far as floor and ceiling go.
I think I like that you brought up that because I was going to go back to Jonathan Taylor. Jason was bringing up the calculus of Jonathan Taylor. And I think if you believe the Indy's defense and they are going to get DeForest Buckner, they are going to get Denico Autry back this week. If you think that Indy's defense can slow down a red-hot Deshaun Watson, then that's a good game script for Taylor. But as you said, if you think Deshaun Watson, it's just that rising tide lifting all ships. I will point out, see, this is where it's bad. It's dangerous to be listening to me right now, folks out there. Kiki Cutie broke the record for receptions in a debut against the Colts. And that was a big Naeem Hines game also. I think it was an overtime game. So they're my guys. Let's see, Gene. I got a question in the chat room about Jonnu Smith, whether it's time to shut him down on Jonnu Smith because if his knee's not well enough to play this week, what do we have to look forward to? What insight can you give us on Jonnu, who's out today?
Yeah, unfortunately, not much. That's on my list of things to investigate a little bit further. I didn't get to it yesterday, so in time for the Monday article, I want to see kind of where we are there. It's mostly been ankle for Smith, so it was a little bit surprising to see knee. Wasn't aware of something specific to the knee that happened last week. I may have missed something, so I'll have more on that for Monday. But yeah, not being able to practice all week with a knee injury. Again, we have a little bit of an extra data point this year with the injured reserve list being a 3-week situation, so it really seems like more of a day-to-day, week-to-week, rather than week-to-week, month-to-month deal. So hopefully we'll see him back to practice and move forward the following week.
Jason, if you're not happy with your tight end options, do you dare pick up Anthony Ferguson right from the waiver wire, put him in?
First of all, who is happy with their tight end?
Right.
No,
if
I
you
mean-
drafted Travis Kelce in the first round, that's if you're happy.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, Sig,
Darren Waller.
we're all old heads, and I'm like, this reminds me of the days when like Wesley Walls was the top fantasy tight end because he would catch 6 passes for
Bubba
50
Franks.
yards. Yeah, I mean, and then if you had the tight end 4, it was a guy that had 400 yards on the season. I mean, that kind of feels like what the season is turning into. I mean, even Dallas Goedert, who's started to come alive. I mean, Ertz is back now, right? And so, and I'm fine with people saying they would prefer Goddard over Ertz, especially this week. But I mean, it still mucks up the gearing, right? I mean, now that they're both back, so the whole thing is a mess. But to your question, first of all, always any chance I get to rep for an Ivy League NFL player, I'm going to do it. So definitely Ferkser, especially because we have to pour one out for Fitzmagic is back to the bench this week. So out goes one Harvard guy in your lineup, maybe comes in a different one. Yeah, I'm fine with it, man. Like, again, you're asking me, can I make a case for Anthony Ferkser with unencumbered target share versus Eric Ebron, Trey Burton, Hayden Hurst, Jordan Akins? Yeah, of course. Well, of course, sure. Absolutely. Like, it's against Cleveland. Ferkser is easily, you can easily convince yourself he's a top 6 to 8 option this week. But that being said, like, that also means he could have 3 catches for 25 yards and no touchdowns. But relative to the other options you're facing, I think it's perfectly reasonable to take a shot on him.
And the big question there is Adam Humphries back out of concussion protocol. So does that who's that extra target? Or maybe it doesn't matter because maybe Cleveland won't be able to stop Derrick Henry. We've been talking, Mitch, a lot about how running back to, there's some guys on the rise, like a David Montgomery. I think we haven't even touched on guys like Wayne Gallman and Giovanni Bernard. They're, Devontae Booker somewhere in between, some of the guys who come on as backups. The point is there's not a lot of certainty. So when you're setting a DFS line today, is it crazy to just take Chubb and Henry out of this Cleveland-Tennessee game and say, otherwise let the chips fall where they may? Or do you dabble in one of these running back 2s, or maybe even go cheaper when you're putting that DFS lineup together?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the field today will be doing studs and duds. And I think you'll see some QD in there. I think you'll see the cheaper defenses and tight ends today. Robert Tunyon's 3.7K on DraftKings. So that's going to lead to a lot of people doing exactly what you're saying, where they're going to grab a couple studs at the top end, and then they're going to grab all the cheap garbage down low, extremely volatile players. I think the correct path is to grab one of them. If you're going Chubb to get off of Henry and Cook ownership, go ahead. If you want Henry, who has a slightly lower ownership projection than Dalvin Cook, go ahead, do that too. But I think the tournament winning plays are in that mid tier that you slightly alluded to there. The Jonathan Taylor is very cheap and a great spot against a team giving up 157 rushing yards per game. You've got a Kareem Hunt potentially, as long as his leg is okay, as a nice leverage play off of Nick Chubb. You can actually game theorize the scenario where Ryan Tannehill is, running up the score. And maybe he's got 3 touchdown passes. Corey Davis and Fersker and Humphries is back and everything's clicking. The offense is great, in which case now you don't want to have invested in Derrick Henry. But if that's happening, what do the Browns do? Well, Chubb probably comes off the field. His ceiling is gone. His floor is gone. And Kareem Hunt, both of his were just raised. So I think you can kind of look at it in the fact that, are they good plays? Absolutely. They're phenomenal plays. They're both great plays. But in the construct of what you're trying to accomplish with that lineup, whatever story you're telling, I think you need to construct your lineup that way. If you're trying to get off of the chalk there and trying to get away from some of those pieces, Jonathan Taylor, Kareem Hunt, Myles Gaskin, I think these guys are great plays. I think they're good pivots. Wayne Gallman, Chris Carson, I actually love. I think Kenyon Drake is somebody nobody is talking about this week. And listen, it looks like they're trying to protect Kyler Murray in that shoulder. I'm slightly worried. He looked skittish last week in the pass rush. He scrambled back instead of stepping forward and running with the football. He'd throw out the back foot, just kind of get rid of it. Was hesitant to take any shots in the open field. I think he's a little nervous to take a shot on that shoulder. Kenyon Drake, they're looking like they're trying to use him to hide Kyler Murray. So long story and long-winded, long story short, find ways to get off some of these chalky picks and go with the volatile picks that I think have similar floors and ceilings today.
Yeah, it's a lot of complexity. A couple of things that Mitch brought up, Gene, I want to touch on with you. Kareem Hunt on the injury report, also, the report that being for that 3rd and 12 and his back, so they set him in, and Chubb actually can And Chubb's actually Matt Waldman's someone saying, he's a really good receiver too. You can use him that way if you want, Browns. So do we have any increased worry about Hunt, or is it kind of like if we knew we'd be hearing stuff about a lot of players like that if the players talked more?
Yeah, I think, it was an important situation and, kind of a quick change on the sideline there, which is why it got noted. But Hunt has been on the injury report with some of these kind of minor soft tissue injuries and continued to see his usual workloads. I don't think that's as big of an issue, but it's definitely something to be mindful of because it wasn't apparent, at least previously, that he was going to be forced to miss a snap or a series here or there. So that probably tilts a little bit more workload towards Chubb, but I still think we're going to see Hunt see a fairly significant number of touches.
And real quick, since Tua came up and Fitzpatrick, do you have Fitzpatrick in a 2-quarterback superflex type league where every starting quarterback is worth a roster spot? Do you throw Fitzpatrick back this week and say, well, that's that, or do you want to hold on to him because this thumb could be tricky and it could give the Dolphins an excuse to pull Tua again?
Yeah, I think of all of the potential quarterbacks that are sitting on the waiver wire behind the starter, Fitzpatrick would probably be 1 or 2 on the list. So unless you have a really severe roster crunch, I think you hold on to him because there's some upside there. I don't know what the playoff schedule looks like for him necessarily, but I don't think I'd be throwing him back. I'm not too concerned about Tua's injury necessarily. They have been pretty cautious with Tagovailoa, and it seems like there was enough progress that they gave him most of the practice reps, which really wasn't reported until overnight this morning. So I don't think there's going to be much concern with Tua, but they've shown they're going to be cautious with him, and Fitzpatrick is what he is. So I don't think I'd put him back unless you really needed the roster spot.
So, Woodrow, how aggressive do you get with Devontae Parker to your bench setting a lineup today because Tua's in? It still is Cincinnati on the other side.
Yeah, right. It's against the Bengals. I would imagine you're not benching Parker. It's tough. It just becomes down to roster optionality, right? I certainly don't think you should feel great and count on him to have like a top 12 week. But that being said, I still think most leagues are starting 36 plus receivers each week, even if you're not feeling great about Tua being back in there versus the alternative with Fitzmagic. I think I have trouble projecting Parker outside of the top 30. I mean, he's 27th for me. So yeah, I think he's in your lineup unless you have just a stacked receiver core, in which case you probably weren't considering him anyway.
Real quick before I tee one up for Mitch about our lineups today, Woodrow, Jarvis Landry, because we were talking about that Cleveland-Tennessee game, and I think it's very credible, one of the scenarios that Mitch laid out, that Tennessee, they scored 5 touchdowns in the first half last week. I could easily see them getting Cleveland out of low volume, ride the running back mode and put them in, well, Baker, let's see what you can do. And we saw what Jarvis Landry could do. Now, on one hand, Jarvis Landry has a profile of what John Norton would call ambulance chasing, where you're just chasing the points from the week before and you're not making a sound lineup decision. On the other hand, he is Jarvis Landry, he has a long track record. Are you nudging people more towards playing Landry or sitting Landry today?
Yeah, I wish we could have our little friend Adam Harstad on the show today. Adam has done a lot of work, and I'm probably going to butcher the details of this, but the general takeaway is that when you're trying to do what we do in the insanity of projecting weekly fantasy output, generally for a good chunk of the season, year end -1 is a far better predictor. Like what happened in the past is far better predictor than even what you've been seeing for the first couple games, right? People tend to over-index what they're seeing this year, and it can often lead to bad decision making when you should be trusting like what you've known of the player. So, in other words, Jarvis Landry was a catch machine for much of his career. He was off to a rough start. You should have, the statistical models in terms of probability outcome should have said that you wanted to keep trusting that Jarvis Landry would become the player we knew him to be. I bring this up because, interestingly, at some point, if Adam were here, he'd probably be screaming in my ear. I believe it's like week 8 or 9. Once that happens, then you're far better off trusting what you've seen if the season. Mm-hmm. Year end, the current year, and then it's funny because the heuristic would have said play Jarvis Landry early in the year and you would have been disappointed, right? And then it would have said, all right, switch, and he's just not playing well this year, bench him, and then finally last week it paid off. But long-winded way of saying I still don't trust him. He had 8 for 143 and a touchdown last week. It was his first touchdown. I mean, he He had another week, I think, where he had 11 targets. So and then he had a week of 9 targets. But at the end of the day, he has not been a productive fantasy asset for 2/3 of the full season and 90% of the season we've already gone through. I don't feel good about trusting him. If he's someone you had to have in your lineup though, because you're bereft of alternatives, then last week was like a glimpse of hope that you might be able to catch a lightning bolt. But I wouldn't feel good about it.
And I think that you're probably right, more because if the game's not going well, then it might not be going well for Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield, quarterbacks, Mitch, if we're doing classic like sequential DFS lineup setting, you get your lineup, start with the quarterback, right? If you're going for the million, you can't play Patrick Mahomes. He's playing tonight. I don't know that there's somebody that gives us high confidence to be a top 3, top 5 scorer quarterback outside of Patrick Mahomes this week. Maybe Aaron Rodgers. I don't know about that. But where's your angle here? Because there's interesting guys. We talked already about Mitchell Trubisky against the Lions. He owns the Lions. He's the Lion tamer. There's Jared Goff, who did very well against Arizona this past year. Hasn't played them yet this year. Has been quite a nauseating ride, and any number of other guys we could be throwing in there. Give us a preferred quarterback for your lineups for the early and afternoon game slate.
First off, I think you nailed most of it, to be honest. I mean, some of these guys you were mentioning, is Jared Goff, he's potentially in play there. The issue with him, though, is I'm not entirely sure we're going to get the upside we need from Goff. He's incredibly volatile. You never really know who to stack with him. I suppose you could throw them both in there, Kupp, Woods, run it back with Hopkins, but now we're looking at a very expensive stack. On the flip side, I think,
Right.
Kyler Murray, I don't trust him this week. So he's not the pivot for me. Russell Wilson, I don't think they're going to throw as much. Chris Carson, healthy. Carl's side looks like he's potentially active. I'm not sure if Gene has covered that, and I'd love to hear that if I missed it. My preferred pick is Aaron Rodgers, and I'm just going to go all in. If you can't do that, and you're like, Mitch, I'm not doing that. He's way too chalky. He's everyone's preferred pick. Kirk Cousins, and I'm going to paint a quick picture for you. I think there's a chance today, and I get that Madison's out. I think there's a chance today where this game actually is a bit more pass heavy than normal. We've seen Cousins throwing the ball a lot more than you think as of late. He has actually had 30 or more passing attempts in 3 straight games. If you take away 2 terrible games in week 8 and week 9, it's been 5 of 7. He's had 3 or more touchdown passes in 5 of 7 games. The emergence and the ascension of Justin Jefferson is starting to also take away the ceiling of Dalvin Cook. And now Dalvin Cook's got this ankle issue. I think if there's a spot today, any day, any week to potentially fade Dalvin Cook, it's this week. And it's why I'm all over Derrick Henry instead of Cook. It's why I love Kirk Cousins as my second ranked quarterback this week behind Aaron Rodgers. And by the way, let me just make this abundantly clear. A distant second. And Kirk Cousins, I think there's a great chance for him today. Go 275 and 3 scores. And I think if that happens, game theory suggests if Adam Thielen is getting those red zone targets, which he has 6 red zone touchdowns this year, Dalvin Cook's not. And at that price tag, Dalvin Cook, way too expensive if Adam Thielen's going to be taking some of his food away today. So I love Kirk Cousins. I think if there's any spot to get off, the Rodgers Express, the chalk today, it's Cousins. And while I know his ownership is probably the second highest, it's not so chalk where it's going to hurt you.
Yeah, that's the Minnesota-Jacksonville game. Minnesota's still alive. And it is, I like how you brought up Cousins and volume because he's always hyper efficient. Certainly he'll be hyper efficient against Jacksonville. Gets Thielen back this week. And also we get the resurrection of Mike Glennon. Real quick, since Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson came up, Woodrow, are you getting cute at all with your Murray or Wilson decisions? Or is this like Alvin Kamara? Like, come on, you're playing him.
I need to calm down here. Mitch was giving me testimony. I'm ready to start singing hymnals over here with that.
Glory, hallelujah.
For real. Man, I wish I had more Kirk Cousins in my life. Anyway, I don't think you're getting cute, right? I mean, I understand the idea of like you're biting your fingernails and you're wondering if the stars that got you here are going to let you down. And that's part of fantasy too, right? We've all been through, God, I've been through almost 25 of these annual cycles. And there's lots of stories to tell of the studs that get you there, and then they let you down when you need them, or guys that that's just part of it. But I can't imagine you getting too cute, right? I mean, they're both top 7 for me. Is there a narrative where you have someone like a Taysom Hill or Kirk Cousins, and you think, oh, I'm going to plug them over him? Man, that's tough. I mean, Russell Wilson's playing against the Giants where Colt McCoy is going to be starting. I got to think the Seahawks are going to have their way with the game script, and yeah, maybe that is running the ball a lot, but Russ is going to eat. I mean, Russell Wilson has made a career of being incredibly fantasy valuable with de minimis, attempts. So right. If there's ever a quarterback that you're not worried about the game script being run heavy, it's Russ. And then, yeah, I understand. I mean, to me, of the two, Kyler is the one that you should be a little more worried about because we're just not sure how hurt he is, and we won't know that until the end of the season. But divisional game, they really need to string together some wins here. Mm-hmm. So I just can't see a bench in either of them for any, unless you just happen to have one of those quirky situations where you ended up with another consensus top 8 quarterback on your roster. Then sure, then you want to get cute, go ahead.
Mitch mentioned Aaron Rodgers as that preferred the chalky quarterback gene. If you're making your stack, is it Allen Lazard as the number 2 receiver now? Do we have any context now to understand what happened with Marquez Valdes-Scantling? Active, played a couple of snaps, but was a non-factor last week.
Yeah, I don't think we have too much context. I think that player moves around a little bit. But Rodgers is going to take shots downfield, and oftentimes when you see him take a shot downfield, you see more than one wide receiver in the picture still. Mm-hmm. It seems like they're just running a ton of vertical routes, right? And one of them is a few yards behind the other, and it could just easily have been St. Brown as Valdes-Scantling, as Lazard, as sometimes even some other players. The tight ends have been downfield as well. So I don't think there's a lot of context there. I think this is going to be a situation where as we get closer to the playoff weeks and we say you're looking for an upside outlier performance, that all of those guys are in play, but they're certainly not reassuringly enough healthy or effective targets to be considered a consistent wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 play.
On this game, Woodrow, we're going to get the Miles Sanders game that we're looking for here, or the Eagles coaching staff just made us lose all trust in them?
I sure hope so, Sig. I'm pouring one out. It's been a rough year, and I know nobody's got any sympathy for me because we did just get a Super Bowl a few years ago, and I get that. Listen, I mean, as a guy who waited his whole life to get that one Super Bowl, it will carry me for a long time. But it's a debacle. That said, I know if you're not an Eagles fan or you're an Eagles hater, you're going to scoff at what I'm about to say, but I still believe relative in the pantheon of coaching staffs, the Eagles are rational, generally speaking. I think they're a little bit on tilt right now because things aren't going the way that they're hoping. And I think a lot of that is that the coaching staff in the front office are probably just absolutely vexed about what to do with Wentz, right? Because if you watch the games, I know there's been times in Wentz's career where we've kind of put it on injuries and lack of supporting talent, but it's Wentz this year. I mean, Wentz is, and again, I understand we've had a lot of injuries and our offensive line is patchwork, but Wentz is making a lot of poor decisions. Now, is he making those decisions because he's gun shy or frazzled because of his supporting cast and the injuries? Maybe, but either way, there are plenty. If you look at the tape, there are so many opportunities where a quarterback making $30 million a year should be able to make these reads and make these throws that we've seen him make in the past that he's not making. He's just playing bad football right now. So I think that there's almost no chance that I can see the Eagles beating Green Bay. But I do think Green Bay, if they have an Achilles heel, it's their run defense, right? I mean, they're still signing guys off the waiver wire to try and plug in next to Kenny Clark to try and help, and it's not working. So I think Miles Sanders should be a get-right game this week. You can't count on it. The one thing that does give me pause is Mr. Howard is back, and they activated him.
Yeah.
And, the last time he was on the Eagles and they played the Packers, he had 3 touchdowns. So, I mean, is it going to be a 3-headed monster? Is Howard going to get the goal line work? If there is goal line work, it's possible. But, man, again, in a ride or die week, if you are still in the position to make the playoffs with Miles Sanders on your roster, first of all, congratulations, because you're probably an outlier. But 2, if you are, I'm playing him. I mean, I'm definitely playing this week, live or die, because I just have a trouble making a case for 20 other running backs over him.
Yeah, and we'll know by the time this game kicks off. We'll know what David Montgomery did, and whether what David Montgomery did was just because Green Bay's defense, or whether David Montgomery is coming back to life. The parting shot, Mitch. Give us one obscure player. Kiki Cutie's not obscure to listeners of this show because of my semi-obsession. Give us someone obscure that you might want to. Like you said, studs and duds. Who's a dud that might be a stud today?
Well, this one, I'm really reaching deep here, and multiple reasons. I think with Darnell Mooney, potentially, I'm not even sure if the active's out yet for Darnell Mooney or Allen Robinson, but both were questionable. I saw a downgrade from Allen Robinson on Friday during practice. I believe they're both supposed to play today. I saw Schefter post something about overnight news where they're both supposed to be active. It just seems like it could potentially be one of those random weeks. And I mean, it's all things DFS right here with this pick. Where is he? I'm going to look at his price tag. I want to get it right real quick. Anthony Miller, 3.1K on DraftKings. Listen, we've seen him have success with Mitch, and he has 2 touchdowns the first 4 starts of the season with Mitchell Trubisky. And I know that was before Darnell Mooney started to get a higher snap rate. So there's a little bit of that as well. But listen, we know Mitchell has had success with, Mitchell in the past. And I think that this could be one of those really, we're talking Millie Maker, a deep dive type, target that you're throwing a dart at. That's the one.
Yeah, I like that. Remember, for about a month last year, Anthony Miller was a top 10 fantasy wide receiver, while Allen Robinson was with Mitchell Trubisky. So it could be a good call because we know Mitch does his best. Last parting shot from you, Dr. Gene. Should we wait around for Clyde Edwards-Helaire tonight, or just play, even if it's Giovanni Bernard or Wayne Gallman or, Devontae Booker, should we just do our best option we have other than Clyde Edwards-Helaire?
Probably. I mean, I think he's going to play, but he's been dealing with a stomach illness for over 2 days. They're not even sure if he's going to play. They've got Le'Veon Bell there. There are times where they just choose to throw the ball based on what the defense has given him, as we saw last week. So I don't think I'd wait for him unless you felt like you really had 0 other options.
Thank you, folks, always for waiting for us on all the different platforms. You can get your Football Guys fix. It's a big week. And Mike Boone, by the way, is hovering, ready to re-enter the conversation. Mike Boone enters the chat with Alexander Madison and then Penicize. So that maybe that brings back mad memories, but it always brings back memories that we share. Like Woodrow said, we do these cycles together, and we enjoy it. And we enjoy you being part of that. Always DFS and Donuts. Mitch Carl for all your DFS needs. And you get Dr. Gene's Monday midweek game day expectations part of your Football Guys subscription. You get all the good stuff you get from Woodrow and everybody else at footballguys.com. We love serving you. It's a privilege. Good luck. We'll see you on the other side, hopefully, in the fantasy playoffs.